Evening, everyone. It's good to be here. It's good to see a lot of familiar faces. I'm going to talk about three different topics. I mean, the first one is really, I think people are interested in what Evergy has proposed recently. The background here is that Evergy, earlier was basically approached by activist investors, right? So basically some very rich Elliott management folks bought shares, got board seats, and forced an internal conversation within Evergy about how to grow earnings, how to grow their rate base, how to basically, post Weston merger, the question was really, what is Evergy's vision in terms of their investment capital plan? And the one option was to possibly be merged with another bigger company. The other one was to actually come up with what they did come up with, which was an alternative capital strategy in terms of where to invest and how to grow their earnings. And that's what people, I think, one of the questions I was asked is, what does this Evergy's plan mean for independent power and light? And one way to think about it right now, it's very early in the process. They have a plan and a vision that they've put forward, but it's going to go through a pretty lengthy process of review before anything gets decided. And so there's kind of a vision around what investment in new renewables could mean in terms of growing the rate base and potentially retiring some coal units, but nothing definitive has been put forward. The plan to reduce carbon emissions 85% by 2030 is put into the context that if certain decisions are allowed to be made by the Kansas Corporation Commission and or the legislature, then that is where they could end up. So a lot of the details are still to be determined. KCC has opened up a docket to review this plan, but even there, the decisions are unlikely to be made either. Basically, Evergy is also, can't do a rate plan for another 2 to 3 years, and there'll be a lot of conversation in the next 2 to 3 years around what the details of this plan might look like, and then what will then go forward in terms of potential retirements and replacement and new investments. On the generation side, there's also a huge part of their plan, which is, of course, investing in modernization of the grid and creating more resilience. So this is think of this as a capital plan and a vision from the company in terms of how they would like to grow earnings, make more investments. Consumer advocates will be at the table, environmental groups will be at the table to help shape the details of this plan. And in the end, the regulators have to decide what goes forward or doesn't go forward. So just want to put this in context in terms of nothing has been decided. It's a proposal. It's a proposal that still needs a lot more details, and then it'll still need regulatory approval for it to be moved forward. And we're hopeful that there will be a lot of renewable investments and coal plant retirements, and that securitization policy tool might be part of that conversation on how one can make these new investments and also keep consumer costs low. And so those are some of the key features. From a second point, from Independence Power and Light's perspective, I think, the best strategy clearly for a smaller player in the marketplace is to have a quite diversified portfolio. I don't think even ownership of generation should be part of that portfolio. I think basically one can do it all through purchased contracts of different lengths. What portfolio theory teaches you in terms of, the whole theory, it's like don't put all your eggs in one basket is what portfolio theory is. But the idea here is to buy in the spot market, day ahead markets, do 1-year contract, 2-year contract, 5-year contract, ladder them so they don't all end at the same time. And that's the best way to manage the risk. There's a lot of risk out there. Building something new and owning it is one of the riskiest things to do because technology is changing. markets are changing, demand might change, storage might get cheaper. So for me, as an economist, my recommendation is always the best theory is to force diversify, but also diversify in a way where you're minimizing your risks of investments that are long-term that may look good today, but look pretty bad in a few years. And that's what that's what you see in the power sector all the time. So I think in the past, whether it's nuclear plants or coal plants, technology is changing too rapidly. And the biggest game changer will be storage. And we know storage costs, battery costs have come down by 90% in the last 10 years alone. And what happens to consumer demand and consumer self-generation and the grid is all high risk at this point. So the general strategy is don't make big decisions over the long term, and don't sign long-term contracts unless you obviously there's clearly you need to have your capacity markets covered in terms of what the SPP requires, but that can be done through a bunch of laddered contracts in my view. The other thing is load shaping. The whole system is designed for peaks, and the system has huge peaks and huge valleys. That means there's huge costs in the system to cover those peaks, and anything one can do to reduce those peaks will lower the system cost. And there are a lot of opportunities to reduce system peaks and fill in valleys that can help lower system costs. So one has to look at things that kind of do that. If one is not doing that, then one is not managing the system well. And lastly, the issue of fixed cost recovery. How should you recover fixed costs from customers? We're generally opposed to recovering fixed costs through higher fixed charges. So if you're collecting fixed costs volumetrically, that can lead to under or over collecting of revenues depending on weather or other factors. But there are mechanisms to deal with that. So how do you recover fixed costs is the other big decision for companies to make and for municipal or co-ops to make. So I would say that basically, portfolio approach to contracts, shaping the demand curve, of course, including demand side resources, because they also help you hedge against other risks. So this is a risk avoidance strategy on how one should build up a portfolio. So those are some high level points that I wanted to put on the table. Don't worry about Evergy's decisions having any immediate or short-term planning decisions, in my view. You can wait and look and see what's going on. You'll still have plenty of time to decide how to react to any Iatan decision, but don't do anything rash around long-term investments. Those will turn out to be mistakes pretty soon, in my view. So I'll stop there.
Yeah, I do have a question. This is Mayor Weir. Ashok, when you say short-term versus long-term, can you give me an idea of what you mean by that as saying, we don't need to, we have time? What does that time look like?
Yeah, I mean, clearly, to me, 5-year contract. Yeah, I think it's okay to do a 5-year contract if you can get a really good price, lock it in. 20 years, I wouldn't do. Investments in any capital will be a long-term, will be a 20+ year investment, right? So to me, laddered contracts means, even if you do multiple 5 years, you stagger them.
Okay, so let me rephrase my question in terms of the Iatan 2 and the Evergy and them potentially starting at least down the pathway of decommissioning their coal-fired plants, which we also buy from.
Yeah.
What do you see the timeline on that being?
I think Iatan will be the last of their supply side resources that they're going to put on the table for retirement. They have a lot of other units that they will be retiring first before that. So my view is, even if you look at the life of those plants, which one gets retired first, and one can look at them and I don't see Iatan being on the table for retirement if we're lucky. And as somebody who wants those coal plants retired, if we get that retired in 10 years, I would be surprised. My guess it'll be 15 to 20 years. I mean, Andy can correct me if I'm wrong, but I mean, I wish it was going to be sooner. So, I mean, their plan is, in the best case scenario, they're looking at 85% reduction by 2030. That means they still have fossil generation with emissions after 2030. And, even that plan that's just a kind of a concept and an idea at this point. And nobody's gotten any specific details around which plant would get retired when, under what conditions. And so to me, this was a proposal that was based around the idea that we want to make a huge amount of renewable investments that will displace coal. Those coal plants, okay. I mean, we've put renewables in and to displace coal, that coal plants that still exist, they just run less, right? They don't even get retired, is what's happened over the last 10 years. So you could also do a lot of renewables and the coal plant's still there running, 20% of the time, 30% of the time, instead of 100% of the time or 80% of the time.
Right, so suppose Iatan gets done in 10 years, I mean, just aggressively. So it would take, I'd estimate 5 to 7 years to build a new power plant. The renewables can't be counted against the base load. They can be counted against capacity, but with technology right now, they can't be counted against base. So, I mean, it does leave a little bit of a, nobody has a crystal ball because it's all clouded by this smoke from California.
The confusion, the issue of baseload and capacity, one can buy capacity in the marketplace without owning baseload plants, right? So I don't think.
That's not a question. I mean, it's a question of base load. So, I mean, that's sort of the decision of IPL is, how do you, I mean, that's the decision of every business. Do you want to be a buyer or a seller? But I'm just trying to kind of give everybody sort of a context of myself, when we say, I mean, things take a long time, I'm just.
But Mayor, but the whole idea of even baseload going forward is kind of an antiquated idea. I hate to say it. So we should be really thinking of what the future of generation is going to be. And what baseload will there be if there is any traditional baseload, okay? Mm-hmm. So I don't see the scenario being, so how do you take wind resources and solar resources and storage and some natural gas and nuclear plants, and assuming there's almost no coal within 20 years, and nobody's going to build new natural gas plants either. So right. What is baseload does not really exist in the vocabulary of some of us going forward, because one is going to be putting together a lot of different resources that generate at different time, combined with storage, combined with demand response. So I think that even the word baseload is actually not what most of us in the electricity space talk about anymore.
Okay,
so we should talk about that. I mean, I think it's really, I can send you a blog. One of my colleagues wrote about baseload in this context of, and comes up in the context of FERC and SPP. I mean, SPP is evolving too in terms of how they value storage. And so this is a changing landscape. And that's why I say any decision to make investments around capital that will become, one is thinking about investing in baseload, that is going to end up being such a bad investment within 10 years. Because the whole concept of baseload and how you use electricity, manage electricity, when people consume is all in flux right now. Mm-hmm. And so the system is going to be very different. I mean, basically, if you're going through a carbon-free, system within 10 to 15 years, what does baseload mean? And so it's going to be a combination of
It
renewables
means,
with
it means
storage.
the lights come on when you flip the switch.
But that's going to happen with renewables and storage, Mayor. So I think it's very, we all want reliability. The question is never, so it's not like anybody wants to do anything but to have maximum reliability. And that's what SPP is also setting up the rules for, but it doesn't have to happen through baseload. I mean, why is Evergy going to be going to, in terms of building renewables and retiring coal? They have to meet the same capacity requirements of the SPP. So if their vision of the Sustainability Transportation Plan goes forward, it's going to be all new renewables, no natural gas, no coal, no nuclear. How are they going to retire coal and do all of that and still meet the reliability requirements of SPP and make sure the lights come on? So this is not just a, you know, it's the system we're moving to. And so we should continue this conversation. Those are great questions, but the idea here is we all want the lights to go on. So this is not about lights staying on, that we need to build, quote, new base load, otherwise lights will go off. People know how to manage a diverse set of intermittent resources with growing storage opportunities, and consumer demand will change fundamentally too. And the idea that one is going to, you know, so anyway, it's really the Evergy plan. If it teaches us anything, it's like they're moving in a different direction if the regulators and policymakers will allow them to. Right, that plan, if it's going to be 85% carbon reduction by 2030, and they went from, by the way, 0% wind to 40% wind between 05 and right now. And they want to go from 40% wind to 65% wind and solar in the next 10 years. Okay, if they're going to be 65% wind and solar, 20% nuclear, that's what they'd like to see their regulators approve. And they have to, that has to pass muster with the SPP. They're the biggest utility in our backyard. They're heading in that direction because they think it's better for reliability, their customers, and their shareholders. I don't think, you know, what are they investing in is that space load. Love talking to you, Mayor.
I'm sorry. I don't mean to be not responsive. I just don't want to, you know, turn this into, you know, I mean, I know we have a lot on for the speakers on the forum this evening. So I appreciate your insights, Ashok, yep. As always. Thank you.
Nope, happy to continue the conversation. And by the way, I working very closely with Mike Kelly, as you know, on the whole climate action KC, and appreciate your efforts and involvement there as well.
Hey, Brent, can I add something real quick?
Sure, Andy, go ahead.
Yeah, hey folks, Andy Knott with Sierra Club. I think one other thing to throw into this conversation is Evergy's new Integrated Resource Plan, or IRP, which will be due in April. It'll be the first time that Evergy has had to do such a plan for Kansas. And they're doing one plan for both states. I mean, they've been required for many years to do these kinds of long-range plans in Missouri by the Public Service Commission, but this will be the first time that they will do a full 20-year plan for both commissions in both states. And as I said, that'll be due in April. So I think that we'll have a better idea then what plants will be retired first and what new clean energy will be brought on first. So it's not that far away, and we're looking forward to seeing what's in that plan in April.